Mingla Babia. Janabu Biomed the Diano World War 3 confirmed Pitalado Shibilo. Usaya, I meant a chain man. Usaya, the bottom. I resort. Didn't it not on Geneva? The Bogu Piorada to US ex-US Marine Bono Naval Officer Yedaga to Piorada the not on Geneva.
World War III is going to start sometime this year and extend into 2024. It's pretty much confirmed in the budget of the U.S. government. Every year I go through these budget summaries and I look for essentially changes. Look for things that are odd or stand out. And for those that are new, hi, I'm Timothy. I worked at the Pentagon and on the defense contracting side with companies like General Dynamics, so I typically love looking at the defense budget. You can typically find different investments, but I recall looking at the budget last year, so this is last year's, and I recall that there was $766 billion planned for both 2022 and 2023. That's really odd when you have a 0% increase for a defense budget. But this year's budget plan has changed drastically. So we've got the fiscal year 2024 budget. I've pulled these defense numbers over here to this spread. Remember, they had planned a 0% increase for 2023, and around 2% is pretty normal for increase. They're planning a 10% increase on a multi-billion-dollar budget for 2024. 10% on $800 billion is massive. They're planning something absolute.
Do your budget plan 10% of to load high US military budget plan. I go to build all that.
Massive. Remember when I made a video a few months ago and I talked about Ukraine has actually been receiving money well before this proxy war? We can find defense payments to Ukraine as far back as 2016. Another piece of confirmation for World War III happening soon is this comment. We need a war by the water. Ukraine ain't doing it for the NATO. What he is implying is that companies like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics do not make a lot of money in Ukraine. The U.S. is sending things like Abrams tanks and Patriot missile system. An Abrams tank is only about $10 million. A Patriot missile around $4 million. But a destroyer, $3.4 billion. Now we're talking money. $75 million for fighter jet. Not to mention all the costs to operate and maintain. Just in 2020, $17 billion to maintain the Navy. Considering that the budget's there, is this just a weird coincidence in the numbers, or is World War III about to happen?
So to be budget yado, todo yo confirm piento la ushidore. Na biya teno bigere nika US budget plan ma yara de graph shi de. Edi graph ya ji me so yin US a jwe ga tin nide usa ko a tou yi be sa ya ma ga the nickel 1 trillion of shit. So Daria le another factor to cool ni le mo no. Ba sipwe go to tone. No you saw it, no. ကြည့်တာပေါ့။ဘာလို့ဖြစ်ပြမလဲဆိုတော့မနေ့ပြန်ကတော့ယူရီးယား Prime Minister ထပ်မံပြီးတော့ voting ခံယူမှာပါ။ပြီးတယ်ရမရတော့မသိဘူး။မနေ့ပြန်ထပ်ပြီးကြည့်ရသေးတယ်တည်င်းထူလေးပေါ့မနေ့ပြန်ကြရင်တော့တို့လိုပါပဲအဲ့ဒီအပြင်မှာရုရှားကပြီးခဲ့တဲ့ weekend မှာ UN နဲ့ deal လုပ်ထားတဲ့ grain deal shut down ပြလိုက်ပါပြီ။ခင်ဗျားတို့ပြောတယ် Russia sanction လုပ်ဖို့တွေပါတယ်ပြောတယ် switch up payment နဲ့ သူရဲ့ဟာလေအကုန်လုံးလုပ်ဖို့တာပြောဒါပေမဲ့သူတို့လိုချင်တဲ့ဟာကြတော့ JP Morgan ကနေပြီးတော့ switch ကနေပြီးမပတ်သက်ပဲနဲ့ JP Morgan နဲ့ override လုပ်ပြီးတော့ပိုက်ဆံလေးရုရှားကိုပေးပြီးတော့ grain တွေဝယ်နေပါတယ်တတိယစာမှာတင်ပေးလိုက်ပါမယ်အဲကြောင့် politica အရန်ယုံလို့မရအောင်ဒီရှာလိုက်လေလာအဲ့ဒီကောင်ဖြတ်လိုက်တော့အခု Crimea Bridge ဖြတ်စီးပြလိုက်ဆိုဇာလန်ကပွဲရတာပိုကောင်းလာအယူလက်ထက်ကိုရုပ်ရှင်မင်းသားလက်ထက်တဲ့ကိုလက်ထဲကိုတာဝေးပြစ်တုံးကြီးတွေပေးလိုက်လို့တော့တေချာပေါ့ဘူးပေါ့ဒီကဘာစစ်ကသားစုနေကြတယ်တခြားတွေစောင့် US နဲ့ Russia နဲ့ထိတ်တိုက်တွေ့ပြီးဟေ့ဆိုတာနဲ့တခြားအကောင်တွေနဲ့နှွှဲတော့အဲ့တော့တခြားအကောင်တွေ US ကမကြည့်နိုင်တော့လက်မကြည့်နိုင်တော့ဝိုင်းကင်ကြတော့သူတို့နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့ဟာတွေဟိုမှာ Iran ဆိုလဲ Israel ကြိတ်တော့မြောက်ကိုရီးယားနဲ့တောင်ကိုရီးယားကိုကြိတ်တော့ပွဲရတော့ကောင်းလေးတော့လာတော့မယ်2023နဲ့2024ရတော့ညော်လင်းပွဲကောင်းလေးလာမယ်လို့တော့ထင်ထားတယ်တော်တော်များလည်းထင်ထားတယ် US X Colonel Leo X General Leo သူတို့တော်တော်ထင်ထားတယ်အခုဒီပုဂ္ဂိုလ်လဲ X Naval Officer လဲသူကလည်းထင်ထားတယ်ကဲကျုပ်တို့စောင့်ကြည့်ကြတော့ကဲအကျွေးလေးကဘဒုစီမှာတင်နေတာလေ US အကျွေးတွေကဘဒုစီမှာတင်နေတာလဲဆိုတာနားထောင်ကြည့်လိုက်ပါကျုပ်ပြောလို့ရှိရင်ခမရကရုရှားတို့တရုတ်တို့ကောင်းတာကြီးပဲပြောတယ်ဆိုတော့အခုကျုပ်တက်သိနေပြတာနော်တက်သိနေပြ Adios
Bad enough. Page 1 of the report actually showed how the U.S. government spending soared 15% higher this year over last year, and the amount of tax revenue it brought in dropped by 9%. I'm no math genius, but that seems bad. Spending up 15% while the amount of money coming in dropped 9%. I don't need a calculator to realize that's bad. Just look at my hands. One is higher than the other. Turns out that the hundreds of billions of dollars going to Ukraine was a huge increase in spending over last year. But no, that wasn't the earth-shattering story. The real story was buried on page 8. Here it is, highlighted in red. And what it showed made your jaw hit the floor. You did a double take when you saw that the United States has already accumulated a record $652 billion in gross debt interest in 2023. What does that mean? Meaning only the interest part of our U.S. debt payment is $652 billion. And then, because you're a smart person, and you looked at the projections and realized, holy shit, the report predicts the interest payments on our national debt will pass $1 trillion this year. What? Your kids are going to say, Daddy, what does that mean? And you'll explain how the U.S. is in such a catastrophic deep hole that we will have to pay $1 trillion in interest payments just to stay in that deep hole. What? Your kids are going to say, Daddy, what does that mean? And you'll explain how the U.S. is in such a catastrophic deep hole that we will have to pay $1 trillion in interest payments just to stay in that deep hole. We are $32 trillion in debt, mostly to China and major international banks like JP Morgan Chase, who keep, by the way, getting handouts from us, U.S. taxpayers. So in order for us to keep borrowing money from China and Chase Bank, we have to pay $1 trillion in interest payments. The numbers are stunning. Just look at this news on our national debt exploding. And that means that in the next few months, our costliest government program is no longer Social Security or national defense. Nope, the number one thing that our government pays for is interest payments on our debt.
Dmitry Babich believes broken promises pushed Moscow to terminate the Black Sea grain deal.
The idea was that Ukrainian grain and Russian grain would be exported, according to the deal, mostly to the poor countries in Africa, in the Middle East, who need grain most. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. First, the Ukrainian grain somehow was directed not to Africa, but to Europe, to the European Union. And it's a fact, no one can deny, because in Poland there were riots, there were protests by the Polish farmers who complained that their country was inundated with Ukrainian grain, something that was not allowed to happen since the independence of these countries in 1991. Never the European Union allowed Ukrainian grain to go uncontrolled. The second reason why Russia decided not to extend the deal is that the part of the deal that was connected to Russia, namely, lifting the sanctions on Russian grain exports, especially to the poor countries, allowing the SWIFT system to make payments for the Russian grain. None of that was done. There were promises from the United Nations, there were promises from the West, but they never did it. So basically, Russia simply, showed great patience, extending the deal several times, putting its trust in the Turkish President Erdogan, who basically suggested this idea. But, 1 year passed and we're still there. Ukrainian grain is still running to Europe. Russian grain is still not allowed to run in exchange for money to Africa and other poor countries. So there is simply no sense to keep that deal.